Yep. Yep. Okay. Hey, Adam was just saying he needed a mic test. Adam, big Adam.
Test 1, 2, testing 1, 2, 3, 4.
And then how can we look up this one? Do you want to make an announcement that people should try to move in? Sure. And we do that. Yeah.
There's the whole balcony. No one's in the balcony yet.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So should I text Betsy or did you text her? I texted her. Okay. So you said you could hear us. Okay. So bus is gonna show up. No. One bus or two? Okay, so second bus just arrived. They're on their way. How, in a second, because you're so good at it, would you mind asking people to move inside?
Folks, we're going to need all the seats in this room this morning, so please don't leave any open spaces. Slide in toward the middle now for us. Thank you very much, so that people arriving a little bit later, we have another bus that just arrived, can get into the rows. Lots of seating available upstairs as well. Let's hear it for the Music Collective. Once again, folks, we're going to have a full house, so please move in. No save seats, no open seats. Move in toward the middle, move off of the aisles, so that people who are arriving now will have a space to sit. Thank you very much. And once again, the Music Collective. Just forward that whole email to me.
Hey.
I just need the link. I don't have the link.
Oh, I sent it this morning to everybody.
Well, I send it to you again.
Everybody in what?
The entire district.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Again, folks, moving toward the middle. Hundreds of seats available down front and seats available in the balcony upstairs.
Oh, I did give you.
double check. Let's see where Bristol
Once
is.
Lawrence bus. One Lawrence bus arrived. Still waiting for second Baker. Should be there soon.
Okay. And I'm not sure where Driscoll is. Where do you want me?
Just right here. I'm just gonna take. Good morning, everybody. Hello. Good morning, Public Schools of Brookline. It's so great to see you. Welcome to PD Day. It's good to see everybody. Can we give ourselves a hand? Woo! My name is Janae Utaro. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Senior Director of Educational Equity. Welcome so much for being here. I just want to be transparent, everybody. We are still waiting for Baker to get here. That's why we're a little bit delayed. Baker and Lawrence, I think? Or they're coming in now, hence a little bit of the delay. But again, we're really glad to see everybody. As folks are coming in, there's still spaces up, down in the front. Please move into the middle if you can, so that the people who are getting here in a few minutes can actually sit on the corners. Thank you so much. A couple things that I want to say before I turn things over to Hey Young is we are in the auditorium. Please be aware of the exits, just so you know where those are. There are some folks who are in 22 Tappan. And Tap in Theater 22, so be aware of your exits as well. You should be streaming by now. The MLK, same with you. And then we have a few folks in the black box. A couple of other things to know, everybody. When you came in, you should have received a program and a room number label. Your room number label is where you will go for your breakout after the keynote is over. And I'll come back up in a little bit just to talk about BIPOC affinity spaces and where those are and a couple of other things. I think that's it for me. I'm going to turn things over to Hey Young.
Good morning. My name is Hey Young Ko. I'm the Assistant Director of Educational Equity, aka Janae's sidekick. We are an amazing office of two. I use she, her pronouns. At this time, I'd love to introduce the BHS Music Collective Jazz Band, whom we had the pleasure of listening to as we were finding our way to our seat. Can we give them another round of a hand? The Music Collective Jazz Band is a by-addition group that is one of the top ensembles at Brookline High. Members of this class perform at festivals and evening concerts, which can require extra time outside of class. The group also travels every other year during either February or April vacation, so we're really lucky to have them here today. And now, under the direction of our amazing performing arts educator and director, Carolyn Castellano, we bring you the Brookline High Music Collective.
Thank you again to the Music Collective. Let's give them another round of applause. It's great to be in here with you today on this day, November 8th, for our First professional development conference that we've done as an entire unit, I think, in 5 years. So that's amazing in and of itself. This year, we are excited to welcome Ms. Debbie Irving to the Public Schools of Brookline to help us effectively engage in racial justice work with one another. She is an emerging voice in the national racial justice community, combining her organizational development skills, classroom teaching experience, and an understanding of systematic racism. Ms. Irving educates and consults with individuals and organizations like school districts seeking to create racial equity, both at the personal and institutional levels. She's worked in private and public urban schools, both in the classroom and at the board level, to foster community among students, teachers, staff, and families by focusing on honest dialogue that educates and connects people with shared interests and divergent backgrounds. Through her one step forward, 2 steps back experience of racial understanding, which eventually led her to dig deeply into her own white privilege, she now helps others identify barriers that prevents people from effectively engaging in racial justice work with one another. Together we will lean in with our colleagues to grow further in our own professional activism. Good morning again, and for those of you whom I've not had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Linus Guillory. I'm Superintendent of Schools here in the Public Schools of Brookline. Before we bring Ms. Irving up, I thought it would be helpful to give you some context. We talk about our own story. We talk about what we bring or the baggage that we carry. Some of those things you have the opportunity to see. Some of those things you don't have the opportunity to see. So where my story begins. This is, this is the late Linus Sr. holding me as a little one, and this is my mother, Patricia, who's standing here in front of what I call our family home. Used to stand there for many, many years down in rural Texas. Daddy from Louisiana, raised or reared in the rice farms. Mother from Texas, reared in the cotton fields. My mother was one of those last generations that actually picked cotton. So I carry Linus Sr. and Patricia with me, their upbringing, their nurturing with me along this journey. I'm one of those folks that when I think, or when many people talk about their senior year, they think about prom and all of those types of things. I don't have that recollection. I didn't attend my senior prom. Now, it wasn't because I didn't have a girlfriend, but I was actually in Atlanta at a National Coca-Cola Scholars Convention, and also my senior year in high school, my oldest brother was murdered. So that shifted. So when I think about high school, those are the memories that I carry with me. So when I think about our students and their experiences here, whether I'm in Spring Branch ISD, whether I'm in Aldine ISD, whether I'm in Ithaca City School District, whether I'm in the Rochester City School District, Boston Public Schools, Lowell Public Schools, or here now in the Public Schools of Brookline, I think about our children and what they carry with us, and it's our job as educators, as professionals within this organization, to help them move beyond the barriers or the baggage, to help them be able to cope and experience success in life. I then think about, and I better hurry up, Debbie, because I'm cutting in your time now. I think about kindergarten, my remembrance there. Marilyn Bird was my kindergarten teacher. It's the first time I got popped in school. It was days during corporal punishment. I remember that. As a kindergartner, I remember her taking my hat and throwing it at me. As a kindergartner, I carry that with me. Then I think about all of my elementary, middle school teachers, high school teachers, all of those types of things. It's fun for me to go on a treasure trove with my little guy once a year. I pull these things out. And I say, well, see what your teachers were saying about your daddy when he was your age. I said, they're telling the truth. They're telling the truth. But again, it's just sort of this walk down memory lane, recalibrating or reconnecting with some of those past memories. And I'm going to rush to my seat now. But I think about Mrs. Mary Raxton, and I think about Miss Earlene Johnson. These folks, Ms. Raxton was my middle school principal. Ms. Johnson was my 4th grade teacher. No matter what I did, these ladies were in my corner. They had my back. They pushed, they stretched, they demanded excellence in everything I did. Both of these ladies are now deceased, but I could call upon them at any time, and they will say, Linus, you're doing good, but you can do better. It's like, well, I thought I was doing good. I thought I had reached what you, no, you can still do better. And that's the push. That's the drive that I have when I think about, again, our children, all of our children. Ms. Raxton was the type of principal, she could walk into a crowded room. She used to do this all the time in gym, and think about middle schoolers in gym. She'd walk in and she'd just clear her throat, and the gym would fall silence. Now, we feared her, but that fear was born out of respect. We respected her, and that's different. We weren't intimidated by her, although she could just give you a look. But we respected her, and that's what I carry with me when I think about education. Here again, this is, I think, the National Honor Society induction or Beta Club or something. But also here in the foreground is Mrs. Lewis, my 5th grade teacher. 5th grade teacher that told me, Linus, you're going to be a doctor. I said, Ms. Lewis, I don't have any interest in that. You're going to be a doctor. I'm going to take you to Baylor College of Medicine, and you're going to do a tour. This was something that my 5th grade teacher, she called my mom and says, I want to take him with me, of course. So off we go down to Houston to Baylor College of Medicine, where her son was actually in medical school at the time. But this is the teacher. Many of what you are already doing, going above and beyond the call of duty, but you don't know or recognize the impact that's having on the lives of children right now. So that's my message to you. No matter how big or how small, those things carry and they stick with you along the way. Certainly stuck with me, and I can tell you many, many stories, but that's not why we're here. With that, I want to welcome you. I invite you to engage openly in today's dialogue, to think about the work that we have to do here in the public schools of Brookline. And with that, I'm going to pass the mic back to Janae, and then she's going to bring up, oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm bringing up Miss Irving. Bringing up Miss Irving now. Let's give her a warm Brookline welcome as she engages us in this body of work.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this will be fine. Wow. Before I welcome everyone, I just want to thank you, Dr. Guillory, for setting such a personal human tone. This work is really about reclaiming our humanity, and often when I step into a professional environment, I feel like it's a leave your human at home kind of environment. And all of our histories are with us, our mournings are with us, all parts of our humanity are with us. And that's really, if there's one takeaway today, it's thinking about how our personal histories might show up in us wherever we go. And I'm going to be talking a lot, if you've read my book, you know that that is what my book is about. It's me trying to figure out, what does white history even look like in me and the world around me? But before I really get cranking, I just want to thank all of you for showing up. I know it's mandatory, but I think you could have also called in sick. So thank you for being here. Janae and Hayoung are definitely the dynamic duo and have done so much work to set this day up. There is so much thought and labor already embedded in this day. 52 facilitators, thanks to all of you who are going out of your... stepping out of your comfort zone, stepping out of what you were technically hired to do. This work always requires stretching, maybe in the way your mentors stretch you, Dr. Guillory. We can always do better. So I also always want to thank invisible labor when I step into a place. So much of social justice work, anti-racism work, is making visible invisible. So anytime we have a chance to think about that, it's a powerful thought experiment, and it's also just really a loving thing to do, to appreciate people. When my husband drove me here this morning, I stepped out of his pickup truck, and the first person to greet me was someone doing leaf blowing. And he helped me find my way to the auditorium. I call this radical hospitality. Then I was greeted by two Metco folks at the front door. Are you Debbie Irving? And then Janae and Hyung were right there. And so I can feel there's a level of welcome here that I don't experience every place. And I want to just be grateful for that. Also, when we think about invisible labor, like, who cleans this room? I'm also grateful for the music. How great is it to start our day with live music? Kids who had a day off and chose to come in. So I'll talk a lot today about what my particular anti-racist practice looks like, but I'm already starting it. I'm always trying to honor people who are often marginalized in society, because invisible labor maps heavily onto historically marginalized identities. So every time we open a space or even start our day by thinking about who we're not thinking about, it's a way to start rewiring our humanity in a way that in U.S. society often we're taught to think of ourselves as disconnected, rugged individuals, leave your human at home. And in fact, things go a lot better when we start to recognize how deeply connected we are. I'm not going to do a formal tribal land acknowledgement. I do always want to say, though, especially when I'm in Massachusetts, that we are on the land of the Massachusetts people, the unceded, ancestral, current, and future lands of the Massachusetts people. And I will tell you, I'm 62, and I've spent all but 5 of those 62 years in Massachusetts. So how many times do you think I've said the word Massachusetts? 1 million times? I don't know. Certainly tens, hundreds of thousands. And it wasn't until a few years ago that someone pointed out to me that my own state name is an Algonquin term. It's an indigenous term. So Massachusetts means at the large hill. So Massa means large, Achu means hill, and et designates place, like burg or ville. So again, that's another way to make visible the invisible. I grew up swimming in Lake Winnipesaukee and climbing Mount Monadnock. All of these signs of indigeneity are around us all the time. All we have to do is notice it, Google it, have conversations about it, and we start to make visible what can be invisible, and the damage of that invisibility is what we really want to make a connection around. So, I'm a good person, isn't that enough? Well, that's what we're going to dig into, because I was taught that was all that was needed. Be a good person. Leave the world a better place. And we don't see color. We're colorblind. That's how good we are. We don't even see color, which turned out to be a terrible strategy. But this is all embedded in this good person, sort of liberal progressive mentality that I want to get into. So it's also important to think about this particular historic moment. Yes, Tuesday the 8th is particularly historic, but we're always in a historic moment. It's always a struggle between the future and the past. And just to sort of name it, this is the world that we're trying to outgrow. And of course, there's always history behind history behind history. But this right now, I think one of the struggles we are in is, what kind of world? Do we want to live in a world that looks like this, or a world that looks like this? And notice there are white people at this table. So this is not replacing white people. It's just living into a promise that's that life, liberty, justice for all, where really everyone can be at the table, where we're living vibrant, integrated lives. And so when we think about, I'm a good person, who gets to weigh in on what a good person even is? And I think that it's really important that if we're going to try to figure out together what does it mean to be a good person, a responsible person, what does a just world look like, we have got to include the voices, we have to center the voices of people who have been left out of the conversation, intentionally and unintentionally through time. These images are from a group in New York called Four Freedoms, and they're replacements of Norman Rockwell's Four Freedoms, which some of you may know. So this whole idea of who gets to decide what's good, how could we have such different understandings about a simple word like good? What's a good way to be dressed for school? What's a good way to open up the morning? What's a good way to run a classroom? What's a good way to wear your hair? You know, it's a really subjective idea. And how do we all possibly have pretty different understandings of a word as simple as good or right or appropriate? It has a lot to do with our belief systems. And this is a slide that came up when I Googled the term belief system, and I grabbed it immediately, because for me, it completely captures how we use our belief systems, meaning as millions of bits of information and conversations and people come at me every day, I'm filtering it. We're all doing it through our belief systems. And the way our belief systems work is we use what we already believe to be true to filter that information. So if we're using our belief systems to interpret data, to draw conclusions about the world around us, to make meaning, which is what we human beings do all the time, and I come out of my childhood with a deeply flawed belief system, what kind of conclusions am I drawing? What kind of interpretations am I making? Deeply flawed. So I think a lot about belief systems. Peggy McIntosh is another white anti-racist educator. Some of you may be familiar with that name. She talks about our belief systems operating like little hard drive processors. We've all got one. We're all sitting here with our little hard drive processors. You're doing it right now. The corker, says Peggy McIntosh and other people who study child development, including a bunch of you here today, I'm sure, is the way our brains develop is starting about age 5. We start to push away information that doesn't align neatly with what we believe to be true, and we start to collect evidence in support of what we already believe to be true. And we can't go back, have a brand new perfect hard drive installed, have a new start on childhood, but what we can all do every single day is we can write and rewrite software, to carry the metaphor forward, that helps us find errors and omissions, helps us upgrade our belief system again and again and again. And for me, that perfectly describes the waking up process. I never use the term woke. I can't stand it, because it implies that there's some end point, like we're done. We're never done. I am a work in progress. You are all works in progress. Every human is, every organization is. Brookline High School is a work in progress. The world around us is a work in progress. And so that was really helpful to me. I truly was naive enough to think, well, I'm going to write Waking Up White, and all the white people in the United States will read it, and then racism will be over. The level of naivete that I started this learning journey on is really mind-boggling, and you'll hear some of it today. But I will say that my book came out in 2014, and my learning curve hasn't slowed for a nanosecond. So I am very much a work in progress, just to drive that home. So now that you hear me talking about the importance of those first 5 years, and we heard a little bit of it today from Dr. Guillory, our childhoods are so important. That's why there's a picture of me as a 2.5-year-old on the cover of my book. I don't know I'm developing a belief system. I just want that pudding. But I am developing a belief system, whether or not I know it. So today I'll be telling my story, and as I tell my story, I'm going to be trying to isolate and tell it through a racial lens. So I'm a white person telling a white story, and I want to point out a couple elephants in the room that are probably here, whether we want them or know about them or not. The first elephant is, I've just said it's so important that we center historically marginalized voices, and yet here I am from the dominant culture, centering my own story, controlling the space, dominating the space. So there's already a tension in there. And this is part of the messy work of anti-racism, is that it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't. And we have to make so much space for that tension in order to make our way out of it. And I think the reason it can be important is that, if you had said to me, tell your racial story, Debbie, 15 years ago, I would have said, gee, I would have thought of all the times I had contact with people of color, and that would have been my racial story. I would have been completely missing the mark. And so I'm here, it can be effective for white people to really hear what a white racial story can look like. And yet it's for people of color in the room while they're stuck with white people dominating the space, controlling the space, centering white stories. So just to name that, I'm reproducing that. And my invitation for people of color in the room is I hope there's something in my story that's new for you, even if it's just a little deeper insight into what white socialization can look and feel like. And I've also heard from people of color across the country that it can be really powerful to bear witness to what it looks like for white people to do our own work with each other. Because that's really what I'm always here to do. My number one goal is always to work with other white people in ways that no one ever worked with me. And that was free of blame and shame. And to really pull people into understanding that there is something in this for all of us, and there's no way to create a freer, fairer world if we don't understand how unfree and unfair our world has been and is, and what our contribution to that is. So then for white people, the elephant in the room is, I want to make sure you all know, white folks, that I don't think I speak for all of us, because all of our white stories are a little bit different. Our class, the era we're born up in, our religion, our gender, our sexual orientation, our ability, our ethnicity, where do we grow up in the country, all of those ingredients are shape-shifting just how we experience being a white person. So there may be a pull as I start to acknowledge how deeply racist I now understand I was socialized to be. There may be a pull to say, oh, that's not my story. I encourage you all to find the ways our stories do overlap. So here we go. My story begins in Winchester, Massachusetts, full of lots of good people. I'm born in 1960. This is what it looks like during my childhood. So Norman Rockwell images, they actually were around. I'm not just using it to describe it. They were actually all around me as a kid on magazine covers, on the dentist's wall, I mean, everywhere I went. And I was explicitly told that what Norman Rockwell, a white illustrator, was doing, no one called him white at the time, but I would now know, he was a white illustrator and he was charged with depicting the all-American life. I knew that. And how convenient for me that what I'm being told is all American, it looks exactly like my life. Looks like Winchester, looks like both sets of grandparents' towns. So what's happening to me from a really young age, that I have no idea is happening, is whiteness is being normalized. And I mean a couple things when I say that. The first thing I mean is I never once turn to my parents and say, what is going on in Winchester? Where is everybody? How come your friends are white and my friends and the people at the dump and the hardware store and the hospital and the post office and the schools, like, where is everybody? Of course I don't ask that question. It doesn't occur to me. This is all I've ever known. It's my normal. So whiteness is being normalized. The other thing, when I use the term whiteness, I'm not just talking about white people or the optics of whiteness. I'm talking about all the values and the attitudes and the behaviors that get normalized in white spaces. I learn a very strict relationship to time, that it's important to be productive and punctual and efficient, that haste makes waste. And I don't know I'm learning one way through time and space to relate to time. This is the right way, the best way to relate to time. And I go on to judge people who aren't punctual and efficient and productive according to my standards. I learn really narrow ideas about what it means to be a nice white girl from my particular class and my particular location. And I get really wrapped up in perfectionism. I think there's one right way to do everything. And that can really undermine this work. I had a quick conversation with some of the facilitators this morning about the nerves of holding space in your breakout rooms later, and I encourage all of you to go into those spaces and notice if you have any perfectionism active in you, because there is no one right way. We're trying to drop all of that and really tap into just being human together. So, of course, I don't know any of this whiteness is going on. And I'm really isolated. I call Winchester my white bubble. I did get a little information from the outside world. This is what it looks like in the 1960s. So there were 3 channels on our television set, and each one had 1 or 2 shows that looked a lot like this, and that was what I consumed. So can we agree that whiteness is continuing to be normalized here? Just shout out what, and you know, we could trade out the word normalized for messaged or valued, because whiteness, you know, every culture has a value system. What do you see being valued here? Just shout out one thing. Okay, so I heard a bunch of things. I'm going to go with patriarchy for starters. So sometimes messaging or value system messaging can be subtle, but the name of the show is Father Knows Best. So nothing subtle there. And you look at the positioning, you know, dad's in the center, brother is ascending. And when something is valued, whatever is not that, by default is devalued. Example, father knows best. Who doesn't? Mother doesn't know best. Kids don't know best. So we've got adultism in here too. Okay, what else do you see being normalized? Let's try one more thing. I heard happy. Did I hear happy? Okay, let's talk about the happy factor. So they're the happiest people we've ever seen, right? And this was 100% in the 1960s, the right, the good, the appropriate way to be, not only in my church, in my school, in my entire town, it was in my house. And my parents had a saying that went like this: if you can't be pleasant in polite company, you need to go up to your room, and don't come down until you can be. And I see so many nodding heads. So it doesn't sound like a cruel parenting strategy, but it had a pretty debilitating impact on me. So I was the youngest of 5 by a full 6 years. So I was feeling left out and left behind, and I acted out. We all know that behavior as kids, as teachers of kids. And I had to go to that room to make myself right. Well, up in that room at a young age, I started to develop really deep sense of shame about myself. What was wrong with me? How come I'm the one person in the family who can't hold it together? Why do I have to keep getting exiled? I don't know the term exiled, but I sure know the feeling. And I solved that problem over time by just shoving down my feelings and learning to be pleasant in polite company. And it works beautifully for me for decades until my late 20s, when I developed crippling panic attacks, which I don't even know what they are. Have to go to a therapist, complete taboo in my culture in that era. And I learned that I'm terrified of my own feelings. And I don't really know how to feel. So even before I started waking up, which I don't place until the age of 48, I was on diversity committees for 25 years, before the age of 48, by the way. I even chaired one. I was trying to figure out this feeling piece within myself. And I'm wondering if people are thinking, well, wait, has she gone off track? What does this have to do with anti-racism? There is a massive connection here that took me a while to figure out. And it's that if I can't tolerate my own feelings of discomfort, guess how good I am at tolerating yours? Or anybody else's? Or what am I likely to do if somebody says something to me that makes me, about me or about the world, that makes me uncomfortable? This is that white fragility piece that Robin DiAngelo writes about. I'm likely to lash out at you or lash out at myself, or just disconnect. And so, again, I'm going to be mentioning pieces of my personal anti-racist practice. A very big piece of my anti-racist practice has been and continues to be to grow my emotional capacity, my emotional resilience, so I can sit and hold huge amounts of discomfort and self-regulate and stay present. And that's part of that's a basic grown-up human skill that I believe whiteness robs white people of. Okay, more things. What else do you see being messaged in this one little image? Heteronormativity. And what the nuclear family? This is the right, good kind of a family. This may feel like an outdated picture, but a lot of our school systems and structures are based off of this family model. Around the country, you know, when are the parent-teacher conferences? In the middle of the day? Who's supposed to be showing up for that? That's a white middle-class model. Homework at night, parents sitting at a table doing homework at night, that's a white middle-class model. So the implications of this are really vast. There's another big one that we haven't mentioned. What about their teeth? Right? They've had dentistry, they've had orthodonture. Those are class markers. Look at the pearls. Look at the watch. Look at the brand new phone. So this idea of who is all-American is so powerful, and it's core to this idea of whiteness. And I think what's interesting, start to think about all the people who aren't included in this narrative about who is the right, best, good kind of all-American. Nobody in these shows is anything other a church-going Christian. Everybody is able-bodied. No one's on an IEP. No one's talking about their Xanax or their bipolar meds. They're all also Anglo. So this is a part of all Americans. Is there anybody here who is white who had your name changed when you came to the United States, or maybe voluntarily changed it? And in every case, it's to sound more Anglo. You're not looking for a more Italian name or more Polish name. So the narrowness of that definition of who is all-American, it's part of a value system, and people have contorted themselves and lied about who they are, felt ashamed of who they are because they don't fit into this little image. And I have had white people come up to me at the end of this talk who will say, God, I grew up impoverished, I grew up working class, I hated those shows. Because those families had all this stuff that my family didn't have, and they made me feel like we were losers. So just to paint a picture of how inhumane and unrealistic it is to think that you can squeeze everybody into the definition of all-American. It's about the size of a hummingbird house. It just doesn't make sense. So diversity is trying to say, wait a minute, there's all kinds of people. Inclusion is, how do we include them? But then there's a we in that sentence. So there's already power embedded. Who's doing the including? And so, equity is really trying to figure out how do we redistribute some of that power, create that freer, fairer world. So also in my house, there were definitely some taboo topics. A lot of them were unspoken, but one of them went like this. In polite company, we never discuss politics or religion. If you don't discuss politics or religion, you will never, ever, ever get to racism. Because politics and religion are the foundation of this thing that we now call race, and have been used to justify all of the racist systems and structures that have been built up through time to hold these interlocking hierarchies around sexism and racism and homophobism and ableism and classism in place. So that kept us on pretty light turfs, no politics, no religion. Meanwhile, every single day I was bombarded with ideas about this thing called the level playing field. So I'm growing up in post-World War II America, and this is a really intense narrative then, and I still hear it all the time, because remember, I'm coming back to the developing of my belief system. What I'm understanding is that people have come and can come from all over the world to this one country because it's the freest, fairest country in the world. It's the land of opportunity. It's the land of the free. It's one nation indivisible. It's sea to shining sea. I'm sure there's more language I'm missing. Life, liberty, justice for all. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. So I'm getting this story told to me in little snippets of language again and again and again that are telling me, you were born in the freest, fairest country in the world. How lucky are you? And it's amplified in Winchester because there's family after family that has a story that goes like this. My great-grandparents came here from Ireland, Italy, Russia, Poland. They had 2 cents in their pocket. They were treated like dirt. They didn't speak a word of English, and look at us now. And so that American dream story felt as real could be to me. It might take a generation or two to get that socioeconomic traction, but it was absolutely real for anyone who was willing to work hard. And I didn't have what I would call a single counter-narrative. I didn't know there were people for whom this idea wasn't working, entire communities this wasn't working for. So now I've given you a little clue what's gone into my belief system. Let's take my belief system for a ride, because we are all making meaning all the time, and the way we make meaning is completely based on what we believe to be true. So how do I interpret every time I look at an organization? This is the United States, that's the organization I knew we'd all be familiar with. How do I interpret that every time I look at any organization, there's a certain kind of person in charge? No one is explaining the way the society is actually organized, and so And by the way, when we make meaning, when our belief systems are being developed and affirmed and reaffirmed, it's not necessarily happening at a conscious level. So I'm not thinking, I'm noticing all white men are in charge. I'm just noticing it, and I'm making meaning of it at a very deep level. And I'll tell you what I conclude at a very deep level that I don't even have words for decades, is that these guys are in charge because they're biologically superior. They're smarter. They're harder working. They're more responsible. They're really good with money. God, they should be in charge. So interestingly, and I'm also not saying, they're not just white. They're Anglo or passing Anglo. They're heterosexual or passing heterosexual. They're able or passing able. They're elite. They're Protestant or Protestant passing. Like, I'm not adding on all the layers that are part of the value system intentionally, but I am. I'm absorbing it. I'm being exposed to this idea. So I simultaneously buy into my racial superiority and my gender inferiority. So the deeper we get into this work, the deeper we get into all those layers and how they intersect. The reason I don't have Joe Biden is I just haven't found a good collage online yet. And I also want to point out that not everybody here is white. Very exciting two-term president by with Barack Obama in the presidency. I don't want to overlook that or minimize it. And yet I want to say, when we're looking at huge social issues, we want to look for sweeping patterns. And I ask you, is there something of a pattern going on here? And how do we interpret that? So this is where some people will say, well, Debbie, I'm glad you're waking up because, your belief system sure is messed up, was messed up. Keep waking up. And here's what I want to say, aren't we all exposed? And I would include people of color in this question too. Aren't we all exposed every single day from a young age to the idea that we don't all have equal value? And where does that exposure live in us? Where does it go? Because we are exposed so early, so often, way before we have the ability to make meaning of it, that I believe it lives in every one of us. And the anti-racist practice is about interrogating, how are some of these ideas alive in me, and how might they be showing up in me? So I may be developing a sense of racial superiority, but what does that mean for a person of color who's constantly exposed to to our young people of color who are constantly exposed to the idea that somehow white people are biologically superior? And I can say to you, I can tell you, this is an example of what it looks like in me. I can say, I'm an anti-racist educator. I live in the People's Republic of Cambridge, Massachusetts. I am radical. I am so down for the cause. This is my we the people. But if I'm really honest with myself first, and then all of you, I can tell you that this is sort of still my we the people. I'm old. These are the aging, I should say. This is my era. These are the we's I grew up with. And by the way, this is a random Google search on board of directors. I have no idea who these people are. But does it matter? Because, 25 years before, 25 years after, there are different individuals sitting in these chairs. And this is the social role piece of our system of interlocking hierarchies in whiteness. There's an expectation about who is supposed to fill what role. We heard a counter to that expectation, Dr. Guillory, when you were taken to the medical school and someone's pushing you to say, you don't get out of this social role that you were born into. And so challenging social roles is a way to start to have conversations about race and racism that are less about this person is racist and this person isn't. This is the system, the structural piece that we want to look at. And I'll tell you a quick story. I was sitting at a book table about 6 years ago. I had done a talk like this. There's a bookseller from the city I'm visiting right here who I've never met. She's selling and chatting. I'm signing and chatting. And all of a sudden she leans over to me and says, Debbie, you just stood for the first time in 30 minutes and shook someone's hand. And look who it is. It's one of your dollar bill guys. And sure enough, walking away is what I call a CEO type. And I think if she told me the next day, I might not have believed her, but I could still feel his hand in mine. I hadn't been shaking hands. I hadn't been standing, but without even a thought, I had done this as he approached the table. just to really illustrate how embodied our social positioning can be. I was taught to defer to white men of this rank. I was taught to show them deference, to show them extra respect. Not that they had earned it, just by presenting the way they presented. It cued to me I needed to stand up, and we can only imagine what the opposite of that looks like. Holding students to low standards, which I did. Disproportionately sending kids to the principal's office, which I did, without any knowledge that that's what I was doing. And some people, will say, well, Debbie, again, your story's neat, but it's, 2022. This isn't the way the world works anymore. Do you know that as of today, if you look at the Fortune 500 companies, 98% of their CEOs still fit this profile? So this social role piece is a really critical way to start thinking and deconstructing around this work. And you say to me today, Debbie, shut your eyes, picture a really successful group of bankers. This is who will come up on first swipe still. Never, for instance, would these 50 black men from an incredibly important chapter of U.S. history come up. Anyone know who these men are? Any guesses? Not Tuskegee, that's one of the two most common. Sometimes people will an HBCU. No. These 50 men are from what's known as Black Wall Street. It wasn't a test. Some people knew it. So Black Wall Street is such a stunning story, and one I learned after Waking Up White came out, so it wasn't in the book. So remember that thing about it takes a couple generations to get that socioeconomic status that counts as the American dream? Well, this photograph is taken in around 1910. So Black Wall Street, by the way, it's in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's taken around 1910. So this is a couple generations post-emancipation. And there is a migration. People are migrating, but within the U.S. borders. So these are black folks who are from formerly enslaved African families, sharecropping families who want out of the violent terrorism that's going on in the Jim Crow South, migrating northwards and westwards in the United States and landing in cities all over the country. And the idea is to gather with other black folks from the South who are doing the same thing and create these communities that are collaborative communities. So sharing elder care, sharing child care, and pooling resources, financial resources, and having an in-bank system in the community. So somebody in your community is your banker because nobody wanted to hand their money over to a white bank. Nobody trusted white banks. And I'll say that's still true to a large degree. So this is considered, and in Boston there were a couple neighborhoods with 1 or 2 blocks, and that's happening all over the country. But there are several places in the country where it's much bigger than 1 or 2 blocks. And Tulsa, Oklahoma is one of them. So Black Wall Street was a 40-block area with 600 businesses, 21 churches, 21 restaurants, 30 grocery stores, 2 movie theaters, 6 private airplanes, 1 hospital, 1 bank, and its own school system. It's considered one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the whole country at the time. I was a history major at a good school, college, and I never learned about this. I have an MBA. We talked about Wall Street every day. Never heard of Black Wall Street. And I researched, I thought pretty hard for 4 years with Waking Up White. I never came across this story. I stumbled upon it accidentally. And for me, this is a really good example of what I would call black or brown brilliance, black-brown achievement that has been completely erased from our knowledge system, completely erased from our collective consciousness. Doesn't exist in movies and books. It's just not known. It's not talked about. And so I always say to school districts, it is so important to teach black-brown achievement, because if we don't have that there, kids like me are sitting ducks to believe all the negative stereotypes. So if I had learned just this one piece of history, and then I'm confronted with a negative stereotype about black folks being lazy or unintelligent, or they like living off the government, it can just land in my blank belief system. But if I have this information in there, there's something to, I would go, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. Well, what about Black Wall Street? So it's so important to build up belief systems with positive stories and achievement from Black and brown folks. And I also wish as a young girl I had learned the full story arc of Black Wall Street. There's an age appropriateness to this, but I still wish I'd learned it, even though it's a traumatic story arc. And that is that on Memorial Day 1921, over the course of 36 hours, Black Wall Street is completely destroyed. And it begins as white violence towards Black communities has happened historically in the United States so often, and that's with the rumor of an altercation between a Black male and a white female. In this case, they were teenagers. And the rumor is that he accosts her. He's a Black teenager, she's a white teenager. The rumor is that he accosts her in an elevator. That rumor is later proven to be untrue, but not before a white mob forms of Tulsans. They come in with firebombs and guns. And as the families and people run out of their homes and businesses because these firebombs are thrown in, they're picked off with guns just like this. Over the course of 36 hours, the Tulsa police force is called in. They side with the white folks. The National Guard is called in. They side with the white folks. And the whole thing is ended when 6 airplanes fly overhead and drop turpentine bombs, inflaming the whole thing. And I have heard again and again that they were U.S. Army airplanes testing new technology. And I can't prove it and I can't disprove it, and yet the whole idea here is to uncover history. And so I'm going to put that out there just so that people know that that's a part of the story. And I wish that I had known this, even though it's incredibly upsetting, because if I don't understand not just the level of racial marginalization and discrimination in my country, but violence and terrorism, I am a sitting duck for that level playing field myth. And I am being set up to judge people as too angry, too sensitive. And I'm also being set up to reject people who are trying to teach me my own history. And so I believe it's crucial to teach real history so we can all be grounded on the same ground. And here's one of the most embarrassing things I will admit to you. In 2014, when my book comes out, I'm immediately called a race expert, even though I hadn't known what white privilege meant 4 years earlier. That's white privilege itself right there. And on that day, I couldn't have told you who one of these people were. And this is just a teeny, 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 tiny sampling of movement leaders through U.S. history. People who have known exactly where the barriers to that free, fair world are, and have been willing to put their lives on the line, and have brilliantly organized to bring those barriers down, to create that freer, fairer world. I don't know that there needs to be a movement, because I think I'm already in the freest, fairest world. So why is everyone running around complaining and jumping up and down and having protests? It doesn't make any sense to me, so I'm judging them. I'm judging all that activity when, in fact, teaching about our movement leaders is a really powerful way to tell the story that we as a country are a work in progress. We're not done. There's no done. And every one of these people has an incredibly interesting story. And then it's also really important for white students to understand that white people have always been in the mix. There's always been cross-racial collaboration. And so I wish I had known that, because it would have given me a legacy to step into. And if I had known the history, I could have stepped into it in a way that was a little more effective than the way I did show up for those 25 years. So I'm going to give you about a minute to silently reflect on these 3 questions while I take a drink of water. So these 3 questions are a part of my daily anti-racism practice. After George Floyd's murder, I had all these people, including family members who'd kind of held me at bay, come to me and say, "Oh, I get it now, I'm anti-racist." And I would say, "What's your practice?" And they would look at me blankly. Think about it, though. If you want to say to me, "I am really into being healthy," and I would say, "What are your practices?" You tell me about how you get your rest, what you do to stay fit, what diet you eat. You cannot just be anti-racist. It requires having a real practice. And these 3 questions are part of my practice. I ask, this is the last thing I do every day. Before I shut my office door, I will do it today. And every day I get an answer to all of these, especially that has something challenged me because my early training was to shove down anything uncomfortable. I have to really pay attention. And was there anything today that I tried to shove down that's uncomfortable that I should be looking at? And this is a way, it's so much more about just answering these 3 questions. This is a way for me to stay in a place of humility and to build that muscle around curiosity. And it's a way for me to be proactive instead of reactive, waiting for someone to point out something to me I don't know. It's a way for me to do my own work. So I offer this to you, these questions to you. And we'll be exploring these questions in our breakout rooms after as well. So I'm going to go on. So some people have said, well, if you grew up in this white bubble, Debbie, how did you get any negative stereotypes? Where did they come from? It's really shocking to me how infrequently I needed to be exposed to them for them to take hold. And I want to give you one example of where I got them. A children's book, the Babar book. I had all 5 of the series in my house, and I want you to take a look at what I'm about to show you. So what I'm about to show you is a page that I was exposed to. I'm sure I looked at it hundreds of times as a kid. So what I would have known as a little girl, I knew that this scene was taking place in Africa, which I was probably taught was a country, not a continent. I know that the elephants are the good guys, and everything's presented to me in a binary in my white world, and so it's good or bad. And so the Africans are the bad guys. So now that I have more information in my belief system, I can see that I'm being exposed to 2 powerful racist tropes here that I'm sure I was exposed to before this image and after this image, and I'm still exposed to today. So the first racist trope I can see I'm being exposed to is this idea that Africa is an uncivilized place. People are running around naked, half naked. That's what Africa is. What I'm never taught that would have been a powerful counter-narrative, for instance, is that the continent of Africa is where the first 2 universities in the world were designed and built, and every university built since has followed that original design. If I had known just that one fact, and someone talks to me about the lack of civility in Africa, I would have said, wait a second, that does not compute. Like, help me understand how to align those 2 pieces of information. Another racist trope I'm being exposed to is that Africans and black folks are some kind of dangerous other, subhuman, savage. All of these words that I am exposed to, and I still hear, shithole nations. That's exactly what this is referring to. And I can tell you that when I was about 17, this is such a vivid memory for me. All the other kids have left the house, so now it's just my parents and me, and we decide to start having dinner in the den in front of the evening news. And it's an era where every single night a black guy is being pulled out of a building, walked across a parking lot, and shoved into a cop car. Night after night after night. And I'm 100% sure I never wondered, what is this pattern? I never turned to my parents and said, what is this pattern we're observing? How come it's always a black guy being shoved into a cop car? That gives me a lot of information. It tells me that I'd already bought into the idea of black male criminality. It was normal to me. And I can take myself one step further, and I can say, Debbie, as a white woman, were you a little relieved to have those scary, threatening black men taken off the street? I don't like to think that I have any of these ideas. It's embarrassing. It's shameful. It doesn't align with my values. But if I'm not willing to go to that place in myself, I have no hope of loosening the hold that those kinds of beliefs might be having in me. just like exposing my over-deference to white men, I need to be willing to expose the negative ideas I might be holding. And look what's on the next page. Phew, civilization. Or at least what civilization was presented to me as, which was European people and European descended people who we're now calling white in the US. And so just think about civilized and savage and civilized and savage, you know, good and bad, right and wrong, educated and uneducated. I mean, all of these binaries that are built that map right on to race and ethnicity and religion. So far I've really focused on bias. And I hope I've made the point that bias is not just negative, that we can have positive bias. I have positive bias for white men, for instance, that they're the CEO type. And I use the terms bias and prejudice interchangeably. They mean the same thing, to prejudge another person. If that was the extent of what we're dealing with, we could solve that problem pretty quickly. Let me hear about you. I'll tell you about me. Let's hear about this group and that group. Where it becomes really challenging and embedded is when a person or a group has the power to embed their positive or negative bias into policy, practice, or law, where it's going to impact hundreds or millions of people. That's where it gets called systemic classism, systemic racism, systemic homophobism. And I don't know anyone who resisted and then didn't understand systemic racism more than me. And so I want to share with you the example that was finally given to me that helped me go, whoa, that's what we're talking about? And it has to do with the GI Bill following World War II. Could I just see a show of hands? If you know if someone in your family benefited from the GI Bill following World War II? So a lot of hands, yep. And so my father was in the Navy in World War II. He came home, I knew all about the GI Bill. For anyone who doesn't know, the GI Bill was a 4-pronged benefit package from the United States government to returning veterans. You could get a small business loan, you could get a farm loan, you could you could go to higher ed for free, and you could get this government-backed home loan that was so sweet. It was 0 money down, and then the interest rate was so punsy that you would pay about half in your monthly mortgage payment of what you might be paying in rent. So people flocked to it, including my dad. I knew about the GI Bill. My dad went to Harvard Law School for free on it, and my parents bought their first home in Winchester on that GI Bill. So I know all about the GI Bill, I think. So here I am at age 48 at Wheelock College, getting my master's in special ed, in a course called Racial and Cultural Identities, watching a film called Race, the Power of an Illusion, and I hear this one line that will change my life. The 1 million black GIs who also fought in World War II were mostly unable to access the GI Bill. That was such a load for me to take in, because wait a minute, there were 1 million black GIs in World War II? Are you kidding me? How do I get to age 48? I was a history major, and I never considered or knew that fact. How does that happen? Where were they in my books? Where were they in my curriculum? Where were they in my family stories? Where were they? Talk about erased. Talk about invisibilized. I would go on to learn, in fact, that there were 1.2 million black GIs in World War II. There were 500,000 Asian American veterans, including the most decorated unit in all of U.S. military history. There were 44,000 indigenous veterans. I'd been taught the Indians were extinct. There were 44,000 indigenous veterans speaking their own languages, which they'd been punished for speaking, and now were being asked to speak circles around the enemy, and there were 500,000 Latinx veterans. So all of these black and brown World War II GIs come home and are mostly, there are some exceptions, but are mostly unable to access any of the 4 prongs of the GI Bill. And it's not that the GI Bill said anywhere in it that it was a white-only bill. This is what's crucial about systemic oppression. It functioned as a white-only bill because there were already barriers throughout U.S. systems and structures that were making it difficult to impossible for black and brown people to access farm loans, small business loans, higher ed, and home loans. So in the name of time, I'm just going to go into what's going on the home loan front. This is an actual ad from for GIs after World War II. So what's going on in housing and lending in the mid-1940s? It's an outgrowth of the 1930s when Franklin Delano Roosevelt becomes president. He's inherited the economic fallout of the Great Depression of the late 1920s, and he creates an economic stimulus package. We've heard that term recently. But the 1930s economic stimulus package is called the New Deal, and the idea is to put Americans back to work again. And what are they going to be doing? They are going to be revamping and building anew America's infrastructure. So that's railways and railway stations and highways and government buildings and schools and libraries and all this new residential housing stock. This is an explosion of suburbia. But here comes this big question onto the table. We're building all this new housing stock, and yet we've got people caught economically, financially strapped because of the Great Depression. How are we going to bridge that? Who's going to be able to afford these homes? This is the moment in U.S. history where the mortgage gets invented. And in inventing the mortgage, the government sets up two new agencies. One is the Federal Housing Authority, the FHA, and the other is a home loan corporation. And together, these two agencies have to figure out how are we going to make home loans and manage our risk, because this is what lenders think about. And they come up with two criteria that they are going to use internally as the United States government, and they're going to make as recommendations to private banks all over the country. And here's what they are. Someone comes looking to you, bank, for a home loan. The first thing you want to consider is the condition of the building. That makes perfect sense to me, because who wants to invest in a building that's falling apart? Condition number 2, says the U.S. government, is the skin color of the people living in the neighborhood around that house. The exact language is the presence of even 1 or 2 non-white families can undermine real estate values. So with that government warning in mind, banks all over the country lay out maps, and they engage in a practice that today is referred to as redlining. And so you can see that these neighborhoods in Minneapolis that are outlined in red are deemed hazardous. This is lending language. This is a hazardous place to make a loan. And the advisement is don't make a loan. Don't put any money in that neighborhood, you'll never see it again. So here's the negative bias being embedded into policy, practice, or law. By the way, it wasn't just black folks living here, Jewish folks were living here at the time. This is a huge moment in Jewish American history because suddenly Jews become to be seen as white and get out of those neighborhoods, buy homes, access those mortgages, and build equity. At the other end of the spectrum, we have our best lending opportunity in neighborhoods that are middle class, white, middle class and above, white. So here's our positive bias being embedded into policy, practice, or law, saying, these are your kind of people who are going to work hard, be responsible with their money, and pay you back so you can keep that interest rate really low. So for the purposes, and I'm not going to go into the blue and yellow, block busting is happening there. Then you can Google that term later, but for the purposes of understanding the GI Bill barrier, the GI Bill is offered in the green line, sometimes the blue lined neighborhoods, and that is why a black or brown GI can't access that prong of the GI Bill, because he can't get into a neighborhood where it is good. So I hope I've made that connection for people. I could show you hundreds. I have collected hundreds of these maps from around the country, but I will show you Boston. These redlining maps are incredibly, these housing footprints are incredibly intact today. They're very much connected to environmental justice. Here's Brookline. And here's Winchester. Ha-ha. So with my expanding belief system, I have a completely new interpretation about why Winchester looked like a Norman Rockwell painting. There was nothing random about it. It was by design. Design that does not align with my values. I believe in life, liberty, justice for all. I am not okay with this. But I didn't know any of this at the age of 22. When I come back, White Bubble Winchester, White Bubble Kenyon College, come back, start working in the arts in Boston, the intersection of arts and education, and I'm suddenly in a position to raise money for inner city, underprivileged, under-resourced neighborhoods. And I am on fire, and I'm raising all this money, and I think I'm a really good fundraiser. I haven't made the connection that you know people with money. That's all you're doing is picking up the phone. That's how good a fundraiser you are. And so I have access to wealth, and I'm allowed to come up with my own ideas and then impose them in these neighborhoods. Talk about an elephant in the room. And I was a little ticked off because I didn't think I was as appreciated as I thought I should be. I'm a good person. Look what I'm choosing to do. I could be a banker, but look what I'm choosing to do. Hear the entitlement and the arrogance? It's mixed with ignorance. I had no idea what I was looking at. And I was pretty proud of myself. You know, I would say I'm raising all this money for after-school programs, but I didn't make the connection that I was going home to an overprivileged, over-resourced neighborhood. But these are two very divergent outcomes of a single policy. Because those 1930s policies around housing and lending left neighborhoods like this economically castrated and flooded money into neighborhoods like that. To give a sense of scale, the GI Bill, just the housing prong alone, pumped $120 billion from government coffers into the hands of everyday citizens. And by the way, that would be $2 trillion in today's dollars, and 98% of that wealth went to white families like mine. And it created two, and I just want to acknowledge that these are two ends of a continuum. But now that I understand this, I think about how I used to go visit schools in neighborhoods like this, and the schools would be really dilapidated, and textbooks would be old, sometimes strung together with duct tape. My interpretation was they don't care about education. Now I look at it and I say, well, how is property, I mean, where do school budgets come from in the United States usually? Property tax, which is based on property value, which is completely rooted in race in the United States. So now I have a different understanding of why the Winchesters of the world are building new wings in schools all the time, and why neighborhoods like this are struggling and fighting for every penny. It's not that people don't care about education. And this is why updating our belief systems is so profoundly important, because we can't connect with human beings that we've been taught not to care about, and we've been told stories about. And I've gone on to learn, you know, things are like food supply is distributed differently still to neighborhoods like this. Transportation is designed differently. Health care access, and in every case, it's superior in neighborhoods like this. So again, I don't know any of this, and I will tell you, I had a man come up to me black man come up to me at the end of one of these talks. He said, Debbie, go back to the slide with the two images. And he said, you know, I didn't grow up in either. I grew up in a firmly middle-class black neighborhood. But if you forced me today to pick whether to live here or here, couldn't pay me enough money to live here. I see people who wouldn't know how to look me in the eye, wouldn't know how to have a conversation with me. They would have no idea how to relate to me. I might not be safe getting in and out of town, and do I want to send my kids into that school system? No way. I want all the resources up here, but here's where I know I'd be loved. And by the way, this black and white picture is more colorful for me than this one, because I can hear the music, and I can hear the laughter, and I can hear the basketball bouncing, and I can hear the grandmother's music and their bangles jangling, and I can smell the smells coming out of that. Like, this is so alive for me. This is like an ice cube. That was a huge paradigm shift for me, and it caught me in my own what's called deficit thinking. Oh, poor you, as if I have nothing to learn. And this is how data works. Like when our data it's more like a Rorschach test. Data will tell us what, and those around us, what's in our belief systems. And as we expand our belief systems, we will interpret the world around us, and which includes data, very differently. So this is a graphic showing us that African Americans experience higher rates of infection and death with COVID. Now, once upon a time, I would have used this to reaffirm old ideas about biological difference, maybe poor choices. It would have lined up with all the negative stuff I'd been schooled in. I look at it now and I say, well, this was predictable, because you have a highly contagious virus coming into crowded neighborhoods, densely packed neighborhoods, because of prior racist programs and policies. You have African Americans disproportionate, so obviously I'm just going to name it. Think of the increased exposure to the virus in those conditions. Then you've also got African Americans disproportionately filling frontline social roles, not white collar jobs like me where I get to sit in my home office. So more exposure in those frontline jobs, and disproportionately taking public transportation from densely packed neighborhood to frontline job, so more exposure. And then, not only more exposure, what accounts for the higher rates of death? Because we've got this virus now landing in a body that's racially weathered. The idea of racial weathering I've learned from Resmaa Menakem, who talks about the trauma and the toll racial trauma takes on people's physiology, stress-borne disease. So this was completely predictable for those who understand how racism works in neighborhoods, in social roles, in our transportation system, and in bodies. And the last piece about my story that I want to talk about is that racism, it doesn't just, if we don't update our belief systems, it's not just that we might draw faulty conclusions, we might behave in ways that actually reproduce the hierarchy and cause harm in the way these hierarchies have. So this is my motto of how I came out of my childhood, a white woman. I was going to be of service to the world. I was going to leave the world a better place. I love children, and I seem to have identified that black and brown neighborhoods need my help, and I'm a good person, so I'm going to do that. And I have no idea why I'm not appreciated more. I have no idea how misplaced my goodwill is. And I have no idea the horrific history I'm repeating. Does anyone know who this helpful white woman is? So this is the name of the painting is American Progress. It's meant to depict that time in U.S. history of westward expansion. And the prevailing attitude at that time is called Manifest Destiny. And that means, according to Manifest Destiny, that white people who've descended from European people now living in the U.S., we are God's chosen people. And it is our Christian goodness to spread our goodness all the way to the Pacific Ocean and eventually around the world. And I used to say it justified the displacement of indigenous people all the way to the Pacific Ocean, until an indigenous man approached me after a talk like this, and he said, "Don't you ever use the word displaced again. It's far too sanitized a word. It was a genocide and you need to say it." And I thought, and my belief system rejected it. History major, I'd never heard that there was a genocide here. Of course, I went on to learn, in fact, there was a full-blown attempted genocide. Indigenous mentors are asking me to use the word attempted to drive home the fact that this attempted genocide was not fully successful. But there was such a vigorous attempted genocide here that Hitler studied it to create his own Holocaust. And the piece of it that I want to talk about, because I think this resonated a lot with me as a teacher, is what was done to the young people. So in this campaign of terror, there is a moment where there's an agreement that we're not going to kill children who are 10 and under, but then what are we going to do with them? In steps a white military man, Richard Pratt, who's from Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and he has the idea, you know what, I think if we can gather these kids when they're young enough, we can anglicize them, we can Christianize them, we can make them more like us. And he creates the first Indian boarding school. There will go on to be hundreds in the US and in Canada. This is his in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. So these young people we're looking at have been taken from everybody and everything they know in a moment of trauma. They've been these kids are from like Utah and Wyoming and Montana, and they've been transported by train. This is one of the pieces that Hitler picks up. All the way to Pennsylvania, and when they arrive, they're considered dirty, possibly with lice. So their clothing is removed, their hair is cut, they're scrubbed clean in a kerosene water solution. They are told to speak the king's English and nothing else. They're given an Anglo outfit, and they're given an Anglo name. They each have a Bible. I don't know if you can see that. But not to be able to speak in their native language, not until you learn the king's English. If they did speak in their native language, they were punished. It might just be a mouth washed out with lye, but it was often a snip to the tongue, a forked tongue that would last a lifetime. I still shake when I deliver this news. And I want to acknowledge that I put a lot of trauma into this space, as that is what we're dealing with. And I think it's interesting as a lifetime history enthusiast that I was never taught to feel my history. But we are human beings, and this is how humanity has been treated. These are human beings. We should be able to make some kind of a connection. So I would ask you, just take 30 seconds to maybe shut your eyes or glance down and check in with your body. What are you feeling? And sometimes I ask people if you could capture what you're feeling in a word, what would that word be? And then the words I tend to hear, I do a lot of work in predominantly white spaces. The words I hear are ashamed, infuriated, guilty, dizzy, nauseated, hopeless. But the more people of color there are in a room, the more I hear a whole different set of words. Validated, affirmed, finally, hopeful. Because can you imagine if you know this stuff and you try to tell people and they say things like, well, all you ever talk about is race. Maybe if you'd stop talking about it, it would go away. So we white people as a collective, and that's hard for us to see ourselves as a collective, but we are. I'm just another white person when I walk through an airport or down the street. We white people as a collective have sent the loudest, the clearest message to our black and brown siblings that we don't care. We don't want to know. We don't need to know. Get over it. And in doing so, we have outsourced all of the trauma of what's gone down in this country into black and brown communities and people and bodies. And we have left ourselves disconnected from our own humanity and ignorant. And so a huge part of what we're trying to do is weave ourselves back together. But there's a lot of mistrust in the air, on the ground. And so it's very careful, thoughtful work. And again, I really want to shout out to the level of thought you've put in here. And I'm just going to, we're heading into these breakout sessions where we'll really get to unpack it. But often people say, white people say, my God, I didn't know any of this. Tell me what to do. It's enough to just sit in this discomfort that I may have stirred up in you today. Growing our ability to encounter news that is brand new and upsetting to us. Part of the practice is being able to expose ourselves to longer and longer and longer and harder and harder and harder pieces of this story. And there's some things you can do. This is about a growth mindset. There's nothing linear about this. We ask our kids to have a growth mindset. It's just expanding all the time. And it's about getting out of our comfort zones. But here's a major pro tip, white folks, is I had a huge awakening when I realized, yeah, it's uncomfortable for all of us, but really, what's at stake for me in the danger zone? Where my amygdala's in fight, flee, fright, whatever that is, fight, flight, freeze. All that's at stake is my own ego. I don't want to look stupid. I don't want to be uncomfortable. I don't want to be called racist. But what's in this danger zone for our brothers and sisters of color when it comes to trying to form relationships where it's required that we speak truth It's still a matter of life or death in the United States for black and brown people to speak his or their truth to white people. And we can't underestimate that. Or not getting a job or not getting a promotion. And the one I hear from families of color all the time across the U.S. is a parent of color going in to advocate for his or their child only to be labeled that angry, unreasonable parent, and then losing all agency over their child. So the stakes are so different. For me, that was a major motivator. Like, how dare you center your ego in this 100-year-old problem of terrorism, Debbie? Get over yourself. So I offer that learning to you. And speaking of comfortable, this is part of it. Like, for white people, it can be more comfortable to hear some of this horrifying information from another white person. And so another part of my practice is to really notice, how do I hear things differently based on who's speaking? Same words, different messenger, and I can have a really different interpretation. So I offer that to you as well. It's paradigm shifting work. It's not linear. This is me coming out of my bubble, which I will be doing till my dying day. I'm sure I'm going to learn something from all of you in these I'm going to be facilitating a group today. Here's how to stay. Oh, no, that's not here, how to stay. I think of 3 things we need to be always working on: raising our awareness, adding new knowledge to our system, and building skills. The number one skill for people, for white people, is conversational skill, because we've been taught not to talk about it. So we've been taught not to rock the boat. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. So if you're uncomfortable in your conversations today, know that it's because your social training has been to not get into this topic, and that you're doing something powerful just by being uncomfortable. You're going to be introduced to something called the 21-Day Challenge, which is explicitly designed to develop awareness, knowledge, and skill. And now here's how to stay in touch with me. And if you want more information about anything I talked about, this debbieirving.com after event has lots of follow-up for you. So that is all I have for you. Thank you very much.
Wow. All right. Well, thank you, Debbie, so much. Thank you, thank you. You gave us so much in 75 minutes. There's much work to be done. I'm just going to say a couple things as we get ready to leave, everyone. We promised you snacks and food. It exists. You're going to go get some of that in your breakout rooms in just a moment. Again, you had room number labels when you came in. That's where you should go for your breakout room. And so if you have questions, there are students in the hallway, there are maps, there's plenty of people to help you get where you need to go. Let me say one last thing before you get up and go, and obviously this will be a chance to use the restroom. I wrote this in an email. I'm just going to read it to everyone now. It's this: for those who identify as Black, Indigenous, or as a person of color, we are offering global majority BIPOC affinity PD Day breakout circles that honor your unique lived experience. This particular PD Day breakout option is not open to people who would like to learn about the BIPOC identities of friends and loved ones. While we all have multiple social identities that reflect our lived social, emotional, spiritual, and physical experience, you will know that the BIPOC Affinity Circle breakout is an option for you if you can say unequivocally, I am Black, I am Indigenous, or I am a person of color, and can speak to this group's collective racial or ethnic identity and experience from the I or we perspective. BIPOC Affinity is not a required destination for colleagues of color, but we are designating the MLK room, which is on the first floor, the Black Box Theater, which is on the 3rd floor, and room 201, and we might put the slide back up in a moment, and room 385. Again, there are students and folks available to help you get there. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your breakouts. Good to see you. We'll talk soon. Thank you.